Thanks for checking out this episode of the Growl Podcast. I appreciate each and every one of you who has joined our family over the last week or two. All the new subscribers, that's freaking awesome. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys, all the comments, all the interaction. You guys are what make this happen, and I can't thank you enough. All the people that have been supporting the channel, I love you guys. Picking up merch, all that stuff is helping me tremendously to keep the lights on, keep the wheels moving forward, and to pick up some guests that I know you guys are going to want to hear from. This episode is no different. This is one of the most driven and intense individuals that I've had the pleasure of sitting down and talking with. Guy is out conquering the world right now. And if you are not familiar with all of his projects, pay attention as this podcast goes through, write things down, open up a second window and start searching, because you are going to dig what he's got to say. Matt Harvey is a tremendously talented and intelligent individual, and I had a hell of a time talking to him. It was fantastic. So check it out. Enjoy. Check out the merch store. Pick up a couple items. Help us out. And share this content on all your social platforms. I greatly appreciate you guys. And remember, Matt Harvey must be destroyed. So first and foremost, man, it seems like you're incredibly busy as of late, and you're doing a lot of really stellar stuff. So kudos to you on all of that.
Well, thanks.
Very impressive. Where I would like to start with you is really far back. Getting into your childhood and where you're born, what kind of family you come from, and then what led you down the musical road. Where not necessarily playing an instrument, but what got you involved with your interest in music in general.
Well, I was born in Santa Clara, California. I came from a fairly statistically average family. We had just like a house you see in The Simpsons or whatever, except it was one story because it's California. My dad was an assistant manager at a grocery store. My mom was a nurse, and then she went back to school and became a nursing instructor, after she hurt her back or whatever. And in terms of music, my dad is to this day still a huge music listener. I remember looking, I don't know how many records he has, but probably something like, 400 or 500 or whatever.
Nice.
And I remember looking at that as a kid and just being like, this is like infinity music, like, holy shit. Now I've got 2,000 LPs sitting in my house.
Right.
Suck it, Dad. But, he was always, the radio was always on in the car. He played records at the house all the time. He dabbled very lightly in guitar. He had an old guitar that he actually bought from my mom's brother, who was a very good jazz fusion guitar player.
Okay.
But my dad's mother, my grandma on that side, was a pianist, and she would play, and she's Sicilian, very Catholic, so she would play at church or funeral services, at the mortuary in the church and stuff. Mm-hmm. So music was always around, and because of my uncle and my grandmother, I had the idea that music was a thing you could do. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't
right.
Oh wow, it was just like
unattainable. Yeah.
Right. If you wanted to play music, you could play music. My primary interest when I was a kid, though, was drawing. Starting with the Spider-Man cartoon from the 60s, which I saw in reruns. I just got super into comic books and, spread out from there into sci-fi, fantasy, tabletop role-playing games, like whatever. And I spent, just hours and hours just drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing. And it wasn't really until, I guess, junior high, when I went from 6th to 7th grade, this would have been 1987. I ended up changing schools. I had a scholarship to this very high performing academic school, but I got in too much disciplinary trouble there. And so they're like, oh, you're on the football team and your grades are good and everything. You're welcome to stay enrolled, but we're not going to pay for you to be here anymore. And so I went to public school, which is a complete kind of culture shock and academic shock.
Right.
Um, I don't think I actually learned anything new until God, maybe math in my freshman year of high school. I'd done the required reading like through like 10th grade in 6th grade. And so I was really alienated, from the other kids. I didn't really have a lot in common with them. And I thought most of them were stupid. And because I was a little shit. And also around this time, my parents were getting a divorce. So, and then of course, 11, you're starting to think about girls a lot more. And, you're very close to getting hair in places where you didn't have hair before and pimples and all that stuff. So it was this sort of perfect storm of angst. And that was when, kind of heavy metal sort of really became something. It went from being something I was kind of aware of and sort of liked to being like, oh shit. Once I heard Master of Puppets, that was kind of like, I thought things were going one way and I was like, all right, now we're going the other way. This is my thing. And that's when I kind of just became obsessed with music, because I think I had a lot of, I don't know, just a lot of anger and frustration, and I needed, to find a way to vent that. And I mean, if I would have kept like toilet papering houses and stuff with my friends, I probably would have, because I was the worst of my little group of friends, I probably would have ended up, getting arrested and
Right.
just for, vandalism, nothing horrible, but just bullshit.
Yeah, it seemed like music, like the introduction to metal for so many in those early teenage years was, it was magical at that time, especially, and I mean, obviously I'm very close to your age.
Oh, cool.
I'm 51, and the introduction to those things were so timely and so perfectly placed as a teenager to do just that, like to take you and your uncontrollable energies and emotions and divert them into something that ultimately became really positive with metal music and harnessing that energy.
No, you're 100% right. There's a kind of, I'm not really into like metaphysical thinking in general, but there is an alchemy there that, you can transform all these negative emotions, all your anger, your frustration, your alienation, your confusion, your disillusionment, because I think that's a huge part of adolescence is, you learn that your parents are just as fucked up as everybody else and they don't know shit. And
yeah.
You learn that all the adults around you are just making it up as they go along and they're all full of shit. And so, finding a way to vent all that frustration through, art, even if it's just through being a fan and being immersed in it that way, it's really fucking positive because, I mean, like I used to get in trouble for fighting a lot. And like I said, going out and trashing people's houses on the weekend and stuff was like my idea of fun. So finding some kind of creative channel for that energy, it had to go somewhere.
Right.
And, thankfully, music came along at the right moment and, there you go.
I have, and I'm sure millions have the same story, but it was very much that way for me too. Like I was getting into a shitload of trouble in my 12 13s and found music and started playing in I was already playing an instrument at that time, but I started playing drums when I was 9, but I didn't get involved in a band environment with some kind of strength until I was about 14. Right. And it completely changed my trajectory of being a delinquent. So
right, you something that you cared about to work on, and that's really I think that's just central to what people need, to have right. a sense of value and a sense of dignity is the feeling of like, I'm working on something that means something to me and that I care about. And, when you don't care about anything, like you become a fucking nihilist and, yes. That's not a healthy place to be.
Yeah. Everything gets a little devalued. So, right. So when did you connect with other like-minded metal focused musicians? Cause you kind of went in pretty hard when it came to the bands, like right off the rip at a young age. So what, 14, 15?
Yeah, we had a little group of friends by about the end of eighth grade, going into ninth grade. For whatever reason, the original Exhumed drummer Cole Jones, I met him in seventh grade, and he and I ended up going to different high schools, even though we lived in the same neighborhood. They were doing the whole like, we need X number of people to go over here or whatever, and so I ended up going to a different high school. But at his school, there was more. I don't know. There was more people that were into metal and just more kind of creative kids in general.
Mhm.
So there was like three or four of us, or four or five, and people would come and go. Like, oh, so and so got a girlfriend. All right, well, he's not going to hang out and listen to fucking Voivod and Corner with us this weekend anymore. Um, and we talked about being in a band, and like, oh, I even knew a kid in eighth grade who like would come up. He would draw these like cassette J cards of like various albums that he was going to make at some point or whatever. And that was always the thing. Like, oh, we're going to be in a band. We're going to do this and that. And you know, by about 10th grade is when death metal really started kind of taking over musically. This is like
Mhm.
89 going into 90. It was a real dividing line when we first heard like, the Peel sessions by Napalm Death specifically.
Right.
We were all like, this is insane. I can't believe this. And then some of us were like, this is great. Let's listen to it again. And some of us were like, I never want to hear this shit again in my life. And, I was still, maybe I wasn't trying to get people to vandalize people's houses, but I was still the instigator. I was like, no, we got to listen to something heavier. We got to find something more brutal, whatever. And so it was like kind of between sophomore and junior year, because we did our first show in 91 when I was a junior. I graduated in 93, so it was like October of 91 that we played our first gig. And, through various sort of fits and starts, people coming and going and being in the band for a month, or saying they're in the band for a month and then never actually coming to practice, and this and that.
Right. Right.
We had to go to another high school that wasn't too far from us to find our guitar player, Daryl. So it was two kids from Cole's school, Cole and this kid, Jake, and Daryl, who was at another high school, and then myself, and then our bass player, who I think was, I want to say he was 18. He was significantly older than the rest of us. I had just turned 16. And, so that was like our very first lineup, and so Exhumed was like my first band or whatever.
That's crazy to be so tied to something that was the origins. I mean, it's like everybody goes through 10, play school bands before you end up lining with people who are at least in sync with you enough to plow forward. So that's awesome that it happened so quick for you. You kind of touched on something that I always find absolutely amazing when it comes to the origins of death metal and like the extreme music in general, is it was built on the backs of teenagers, which is pretty impressive. A lot of 16, 17, 18-year-old.
Yeah.
And when you look at the comparison between a 16, 17-year-old then musically to a 16, 17-year-old now, being able to keep a band together, negotiate a record deal, to try to get things together, to go on tour, to do all these things, it's like a whole different planet where in the 90s. What was it like for you guys at that time? Because it seems like, getting connected with a label and putting product out and getting there, happened for a lot of people at a young age. What was it like for you guys?
Well, for better or for worse, we didn't really sign a proper record deal until 1998, when we'd been a band for quite a while and gone through a bunch of permutations of things. To me, the business side was like just a complete mystery, beyond like, we dubbed some tapes and we sent them in the mail to a couple fanzines and, other bands or whatever. And, my thought was like, well, you just do this. And if enough people like it, or if people think it's good, somebody's going to like call you up one day and be like, hey, this is Monty Connor from Roadrunner or whatever.
Right.
And that's not really how it works, how it has ever worked, but I just didn't really know. And my thought at the time was that, again, these are the thoughts of a teenager. My instinct was, well, I shouldn't know about the business because I don't want that to enter into the music. I just want to focus on the creative aspect of it or whatever. And it took a few years to kind of figure out, like, well, if I'm sort of the main songwriter in the band, I need to at least know a little bit about something, what's going on, because I'm actually the person with the most on the line here, if
Right.
we do something or not or whatever. But my initial thought was like, no, the business is a totally separate thing. And it's also interesting because, you talk about a lot of these guys, Entombed, I think, the average age was what, 17 or 18 when they were
It's
doing the thing.
bonkers.
Yeah.
Thinking back on
And
it's crazy.
the idea that these kids negotiated record contracts is really generous, because I think they just signed whatever. I mean,
Mhm.
Earache in particular, um, the amount of money that they made off records made by under 21-year-olds, whether it was Scum or Left Hand Path or, Recaputrefaction or whatever. I mean, like, those dudes got fucking ripped off
Yeah,
royally rather,
you
of
are
the
right.
royalties.
You are right. You are right.
So, and I mean, and even, talking with the obituary guys about the deal that they got, they were a little bit older, but the deal that they got with Roadrunner, um, in the early 90s was really long term and really restrictive. And I remember we were the local band opening for Cannibal Corpse in 92. And, one of us, not me, but one of us asked Alex Webster, who was just too nice for his own good. He's just getting punished by this group of teenagers.
Mhm.
And, like what it was like working with Metal Blade and this and that. And he's like, well, they signed us to this 7-album deal. And it was like 7 albums. Holy shit, dude.
That's crazy.
So
Yeah.
these guys, they made their record labels a lot of fucking money back
Right.
then.
And I'm sure none of them at that time, well, you're naive obviously in the beginning and you think that, getting that label support is the end all. Here comes, a job, some financial stability and
Right.
whatever, but I'm sure, a very fine percentage of these kids, if any, actually had any representation to understand what's going on as and from a label perspective, what a gold mine. Like you're just getting child labor to push this whole thing forward.
Well, and I think the thing that has changed, for the better. There's a bunch of things that have changed for the better since those days. Number one being that since record sales are in the fucking toilet, nobody works at record labels to like get rich. Everybody
Mhm.
that works at a record label, and I imagine it's probably even true at the majors at this point. Everyone that works there gives a shit about the artists and the music. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? So that element is gone. And the other thing is that there's so much more information about business practices, and because record sales are so low, like, you're able to kind of, like, you can navigate that playing field even more easily because it's more level. And it's like, sure, there's more prestige to being on Nuclear Blast than there is to being on Redefining Darkness. But it's not like if you're on Redefining Darkness, people will still be able to find you on Apple Music and Amazon Music and Spotify and every other fucking streaming service and Bandcamp and this and that. So, whereas before, when you had to get a physical thing into a physical location, you know, you needed that distribution was everything, right? If your label didn't have good distribution, you can make the greatest record ever and nobody would know about it. I mean, like, look at
Right.
the first Demolic album. I remember getting that album in high school when it was coming out, and I've been like, this is amazing. And like, why doesn't anybody know about this? It's like, oh, because there's no fucking distribution for this.
Yep.
So anyway, there's a lot of things that have changed, for the better, and people know more about the business. There's more information about it. There's more, cautionary tales, and also people are more open about it than they used to be. It's like the old custom of like, oh, don't tell anybody you work with how much money you make or whatever. Whereas now people are like, yeah, no, I fucking got ripped off, and this is how they did it, and this is why I signed it, and if you can avoid this, like, try to avoid it.
Yeah. Well, with the internet, there's not much for secrets anymore. It seems like, so
Right.
if you're doing a shitty job or you're shitty to people, it doesn't stay a secret for very long. And it's funny that you mentioned, Thomas and Redefining Darkness that's my primary label guy that I work with,
Oh, awesome.
for one of the bands that I'm in. And I've worked with a handful of other labels through earlier in my career, and getting through and finding kind of that solace in working with someone who's been in the trenches and understands it and has been through the evolution of the process, working with labels, kind of getting bent over with labels to now running a label,
Right.
and being able to be like, hey, it is a business, and there are fundamentals that have to be addressed, but at the same time, in the end, it is kind of about the artist and owning your own material and retaining rights to your own material, and having the option, as narrow as it may be, that if something does go your way, you can run with it. And I think that was so restrictive for a lot of these guys in the early days, is once you do start taking off, you have no control. You have no control of your material, and you have no financial control at that point either. So yeah, a huge plus in that regard, I think.
Yeah, it's a very rare story, like something like Mastodon, where they were working with a label that actually gave a shit about them, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, you guys are going to go to a fucking major." Instead of being like, "No, we want to hold on to you and squeeze those others dry,"
Yeah.
they're like, "Hey, well, let's facilitate this move because you'll sell more records." And that I don't know exactly what the mechanics of the deal were, but I know that Relapse worked with, I think it was a Reprise or whatever they ended up signing with, in order to allow the band to really fucking grow. And it's
Mm-hmm.
that is less rare nowadays than it used to be. And I mentioned Redefining Darkness because I know Tommy, and that guy gives a fuck. Like he really,
Right. He
and
does, man. He's a good
he's
dude.
like,
Really good
he
dude.
puts the packaging and stuff that he puts together, like, every release is a labor of love. And I think that, I think that that's more true now than ever, especially for this kind of music, because nobody is signing, Necropsy Odor or whatever, thinking like, oh, I'm going to make $1 million off this.
Yeah. At this point, it's like, man, if I can just make my money back, for production, I'll be stoked.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other great thing, as much as, the future has ended up being pretty horrible in lots and lots of ways. The other great thing is that producing a record is so much fucking cheaper now.
Yeah.
We built a recording studio for an album budget, and our album budgets are, they're not huge. They're
Mhm.
certainly, I think that they're commensurate with what we deserve or whatever. But I mean, it's not like nobody's throwing $300,000 at us to make a fucking record.
Mhm.
But and of course we built it ourselves, and our drummer is a construction guy, so thankfully that the labor and stuff was cheap because we did it ourselves. But I mean, the idea that you could get under $50,000 and slap together a recording studio for that, I mean, that would have been impossible in the 90s.
Absolutely. And that's another huge positive, I think, as we move forward. It's got its pluses and minuses, but again, being in control of your destiny, being in control of your own projects, to where you're not at the mercy of, this engineer and this studio and this, whatever. You have the freedom to be as good or as bad as that pans out to be. But it's kind of nice, I think back to the late 80s, early 90s, going in the studio and having engineers and producers who have no fucking clue what they're getting into, and then you go in there and you're dropping thousands down, and you get something that sounds like it's screaming through a toilet paper tube because they have no idea how to facilitate that extremity in music.
And they're they're not interested in learning about it because
they don't care.
There's no alternative. If they're like one of 3 rock producers in city X, it's like, well, what are you going to do? You're going to just go there and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's really been kind of the I don't know, the guiding principle of what we've been doing for the last, certainly the last decade with Exhumed, is to sort of, control as much as we want. I don't want to be my own publicist because I think that's awkward.
Right.
I don't want to be my own record label because I don't want to be doing direct sales, and I don't want to have to be so immersed in the minutia of working with, Spotify, YouTube, fill in
Hmm.
malevolent creation or malevolent corporation X, Y, or Z. Um, that's not how I want to spend my time. That said, being able to record our own records is great.
Right.
Getting our own vehicle to tour in is great. Um, like we anything that we can do ourselves that we think makes sense, we try and do ourselves. And it's it's weird because you think of it, or I thought of it when I was younger, at least, like, oh, this is like super punk. And it's like, well, I guess it is, but it's also like you just end up being like, well, it's kind of like we own a small business.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and that doesn't sound as punk when you put it that way.
Right, right. When you talk about, delegating certain aspects of it to, I run a couple businesses and I like to have my hands on as much as I can, except for when I can hire someone to do a better job than I can do. And it's admitting your weaknesses, right? So, if I got to sit here and I got to do what, for my bands, what Tommy's doing, and Tommy's way better than I am at it, then by all means, Tommy should be doing it and Tommy should be
Right.
getting his piece of the pie to do so. I think it's just a betterment for the project as a whole.
And it also, I mean, I think it's also about, for me, I, my favorite part is still just writing the fucking music and like,
Yeah.
and I like rehearsing the music, I like recording the music, and I like playing live, and all the things that we do ourselves are in service of that. Whereas I think if you get so deep into the mechanics of the business or whatever, then ultimately, to me, it's like, well, that's taking too much away from being able to do the stuff that I really care about.
I agree.
I
I
want to
agree.
make sure that I'm enabling the stuff that is, crucial to what I want to get out of this. And,
Yeah.
outsourcing some of that is healthy. And also, I mean, it's also healthy to get, outside perspective. It's just, you have to get it from somebody that you respect, and somebody that that you're all pulling in the same direction.
Yep. Yep. So jumping back a little bit, coming out of the gate with Exhumed, um, kind of touched on a little bit, but you guys hit the extremity of it really hard. So coming out is a very extreme band right off the rip. What, I know you mentioned Napalm Death. Um, and actually you kind of mentioned another thing too about, when you heard Napalm Death, is like, how extreme can things go? Was that a pretty big driving force with you? What led you down the, contextual aspect of what Exhumed was in the beginning?
I mean, growing up in the Bay Area, especially in the late '80s, you were just swimming in the Bay Area thrash sound. And at the time, Metallica hadn't even hit the ceiling yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like the biggest band in the world ceiling, like the high. Yeah, that's kind of where they are now. But it just seemed like there was this huge thing happening with Metallica, with Exodus, with Testament, and then to a lesser extent, you had your Heathen and Forbidden and Lat's Rocket, and then below that you had Bacchus, and you had Laughing Dead and Chaos and Wrecking Machine, and then Violence was getting signed to a major label. So there was this sort of huge metal movement going on all around us. We were in San Jose, so San Jose is the uncool kind of stepchild of San Francisco. And we were really young, this is like with being 13, 14. But I think one of the things, there was a bunch of things that I liked about death metal beyond just like I liked the way it sounded, but it felt like nobody was really doing it where we were, so that it could be our thing,
Mm-hmm.
rather than being, Exodus version 6.3 or whatever, like so many of the bands, whether it was Mordred or whatever, kind of, you could really reduce a lot of the Bay Area scene to just being like another flavor of Metallica, Testament,
Right.
or some mixture of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, so it was a way to kind of feel like we had our own thing. And, a lot of the Bay Area thrash crowd thought about death metal the way that, probably people that listen to like Y&T and the Scorpions thought about Metallica in 1982, 83. They're like, what the fuck is this noise? This is bullshit.
Right, right.
And that appealed to me. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, okay, because, metal didn't feel that anti-establishment when, you get Metallica on the Grammys and you're going to see, Testament and Nuclear Assault and Voivod in front of like, 3,000 people. It didn't, hearing the records and identifying with it, it felt very subversive. And then when I kind of started going to gigs, I was like, oh, this is not as, underground or whatever as it felt to me. And I was looking for something that matched kind of how it felt to me more. And I think death metal served that purpose. And, I was a little edgy little kid, and anything that upset people was like, oh,
Right. That was going to be a little bit of what I was touching on, getting
Sure.
into like that early age of kind of the no press is bad press mentality, to where if you're pushing buttons and rubbing people abrasively, then you're on the right path. I mean, there was a huge portion of extreme metal that was that way, which now I think people are getting a little too sensitive when it comes to a lot of this shit. But it's, being offended, putting yourself out of your comfort zone was a huge attraction to what was happening at that time.
It definitely was. And I think, we talk about it sometimes, some of the things that, we thought were edgy or cool as 15-year-olds now are sort of eye roll inducing, as middle-aged men. And I think that, even some of the stuff that we did, on the demos and even up to like the second record, there's definitely things that I would not do now, and not because I'm like, oh, someone's going to get offended. It's just more like, this is kind of cheap and it's really juvenile, and it's, smacks of that sort of like, can't get laid, write a song about fucking cutting up some chick, it's like, boy. But when you're 15 or 16 or whatever, that, that's fine. And I mean, while, I think a lot of people that are getting sensitive about this stuff, I think a lot of it's really well intentioned, but I think when you turn it to art, then you're going to lose the plot, because people that like this art that maybe you find offensive, they would probably tend to agree with you, culturally or politically. But then when you make it about like, oh, but you shouldn't listen to band X, and it's like, oh my God, come on.
I agree.
Then you're going to push people the other way. They're like, oh, all these fucking PC fucks, they just want to ruin everybody's time with their bullshit and blah, blah, blah. And so I think it's a real self-sabotaging, impulse to go out and be like, oh, well, this music's bad because this and that. And also, you can't litigate, shit that happened decades before. It's like,
exactly.
Obviously, I love death, but like when Chuck goes, I celebrate a faggot's death, human disgrace, and mutilation. I'm like, I don't think that's cool. I'm like, when Left to Die plays that song live, I say I celebrate a poser's death, because I don't want to say that. But I can't get mad about some guy that I don't fucking know recorded 40 years ago. Like, who gives a shit?
It's a whole different world and a whole different sense of delivery and perception at the same time too. Sure. I mean, it's hard to explain as now having teenage kids, trying to explain to them where my era was at. It's really next to impossible to attempt to do, in so many forms. Like, I could sit here and try to explain to you what it was like growing up in early death metal. And if you didn't grow up in that era, you're not going to get it, right. You're not going to understand it. So you're right. I mean,
and it's also the context for things is so much of everything. My wife is 17 years younger than me. So she's 30, I guess she's gonna be 33 this year. And she's from the UK. And when we first started dating, I showed her Airplane, she's like, this is what I think is funny. And she's like, I don't understand this joke. And I was like, okay, so this woman, Barbara Billingsley, she was on Leave It to Beaver. She's like, well, what's Leave It to Beaver? And I was like, okay, so Leave It to Beaver. And then by the time I get back to, Oh, Stewardess, I Speak Jive, and Why Is This Funny? It's like a 15-minute thing. And she's like, yeah, this.
Yep.
You're like, oh, all right, never mind. I guess, there's too much context. And I'm not saying, that makes it okay to say things like, faggots are human disgraces in songs. I don't think it's okay. But I also think that it was a lyric written by a fucking 17-year-old from Florida 40 years ago. And it wasn't like in the end when Chuck was doing Control Denied, he was like writing songs about that at all. So
Right.
clearly he was a little edgelord, just like I was when I was fucking, spending my Saturday nights throwing 30 rolls of toilet paper
Yep.
on people's lawns.
Yep.
So, it's like, come on, man.
Yep. It's that growth and development of anything. I mean,
Right.
when you're a teenager, your brain's barely working. You think it's on firing on all cylinders, and then and you're not thinking about regret in any form or fashion either.
And I mean, thank God or whoever. I mean, that, there was no internet or social media, when I was a teenager. It's like, man, that's some of the stuff that went through my brain, was very fucking cringy. And it's like,
Mhm.
I never wrote it down. I never put it out in public. I might have talked to some of my friends about it, and that's as far as it went. And I'd never have to think about it again because
Right.
I never fucking wrote it down and made a record of it anywhere.
Right. Right.
So it's like, and I feel bad, for kids because I think that they don't get to escape that kind of scrutiny. And I certainly wouldn't want to be judged by something that I wrote down, 30 years ago or whatever,
Right.
or at age 17. So it's like, anyway, it's a whole cultural conundrum that we find ourselves in.
It is kind of sad. I don't want to dig into it too deep, but just to kind of mention it, like it is something to think about for the generation now. The teenagers now are under such a huge microscope of 24/7. Everybody knows
Right.
where they are, who they're with, how long they're there, and what they said and what they did, and it's there's zero liberty to be you and make mistakes.
And that's the thing is, it's the wiggle room to make mistakes. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember when like Stranger Things was getting super popular, and I was, our drummer's girlfriend runs a catering company, and I would do catering gigs for her sometimes, and a lot of college kids and whatever doing these gigs, which makes sense. And I remember when Stranger Things was getting popular, the point was that these college kids were like, "Is that what you did when you were a kid? You just like got on your bike and just rode around?" And it's like, yeah, that's what you did. You just you had to watch, and it was like, oh, dinner's at 6. All right, I guess I got to be home by 6 or whatever, or I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Like, well, how did you find anybody? I was like, I don't know, you just
Looked for the pile of BMX bikes in the front yard.
You just rode around. Like sometimes you just like, oh, my friend lives down this street. I wonder what he's doing. Maybe he's had some action figures we can fucking blow up or whatever.
So I learned doing a little bit of research, and I learned a moment in your history as far as recording and stuff that I kind of wanted to touch on real quick, because it's kind of an interesting moment in time. You started working with James Murphy on some production stuff during kind of the height of his medical struggles and his his unawareness of what was actually happening to himself. What was that like? What really happened during that? Because I think there's a lot of he said, she said, this happened, that happened. What really went down?
Well, James mixed our first album in '98, and I'm not sure where he was in his illness at that time. I'm not a doctor, and I know James, like he's a friend of mine, but I'm not to the extent where I'm like, oh, but it was progressing here and there, but I know he definitely had some erratic behavior. He's a little bit of a high strung cat anyway, and I think, I'm not saying anything about him that he wouldn't say about himself. But during the recording, it was kind of wild. There was some equipment malfunctions, and I think the main thing was he had some expectations of the recording engineer that the recording engineer just didn't give a shit about, and he just was like, "Fuck it, now it's someone else's problem." So he was not receiving what he expected to work with, and on top of that, he was having some equipment problems, and I don't remember if he was still in Testament at the time, or if he was on his way out or had already been dismissed or what. But I don't think that situation was great. And then, he's got a fucking brain tumor growing in his head. So he was a little bit all over the place,
Right.
And like I said, knowing him, having known him for years now, he is kind of high strung and a little bit all over the place anyway, but not like he was when we were working with him back then,
Yeah.
And I think also, the fact that we didn't really know anything about the process, and we all wanted to be there because A, it's our first album getting mixed, and B, it's James Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably not very productive either. Like that, if I had a band sitting here while I was trying to mix the record, and it's four guys that want to talk to me about recording the first album or whatever while I'm trying to fucking mix, it's like, because we're like, oh, it's the cause of death. Like, what was that? Like, oh, spiritual healing, whatever. So some of that is on us as well. But yeah, he was, kind of erratic and kind of all over the place. And I don't think anybody in the band or him were particularly happy with the way that the mix for the first album came out. It was
Mm-hmm.
but it was an adventure.
Right. Well, it's like in multiple facets. Obviously, you do this for memories. I think in the end, you're doing it, for the list of memories you get out of it. Otherwise, we'd all just work an enjoyment. You just work a menial otherwise. Right. So having that, kind of stamp in time is still pretty cool. I'm sure at the time it was a mess, but it was,
Yeah. I mean, and for whatever reason, our first album has ended up being pretty durable, which I feel very lucky
mm-hmm.
about. As much as aspects of creating it were not terribly pleasant. So I think when you do a record that people still want to hear, whatever it is now, 1998 to now. I don't even know, 26, 27, 28 years on,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Whether or not, you had a good time mixing it, or whether or not you were getting along in the band at the time, especially as we've all gotten older and kind of, rekindled friendships and stuff. I think that stuff seems further and further in the rear view, and ultimately it's just great that people want to fucking hear some of these songs,
Right. So you kind of touched on something that I wanted to get to, and it's more of probably a little bit more of the unpleasantries, is going through a little bit of the band revolving door, during those times in the early 2000s. And, my question with that is, as a musician myself, the thing that always feels so important and overlooked when people are talking about, oh, they went from this drummer to this drummer, or this guitar player to this guitar, is chemistry. And when you have that door, musicians coming in and out, was it a struggle for you guys or for yourself, because you ended up kind of being the guy keeping chemistry and connecting with other musicians to keep putting out solid material?
Well, especially in the cycle of the first three records, not cycle, whatever the era, our drummer Cole and I were constantly there. And Mike Beams came in right before the first album and stayed for the first three. And Cole and I have always been super tight ever since we met on the school bus in seventh grade. So we always had good chemistry, even if we weren't great players or didn't really take our instruments terribly seriously for a long time. But we always had good chemistry, and we always understood, we understood where we were coming from. Cole would be like, oh, if he's doing this kind of thing, well, it's either going to go this direction next or that direction or whatever. And I think it should go this direction because it's more brutal or whatever. And I'd be like, cool, let's be more brutal. Let's do that. So that part was real easy. But I think that the main thing as far as changing lineups and stuff early on is, when you don't make any fucking money and you don't know if you're going to make any money, like, people's incentive to stick around is it wanes pretty quickly.
Right.
And, we're certainly, very, very far from getting rich off of doing any of this. But at the same time, we are now at a point where we're able to go, hey, we're going to go on tour for X amount of time. You're going to make X amount of money, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. And if that happens consistently, then people want to stick around, So I think having a handle on the business aspect, of the band, even if it's not good, even if you're like, hey, we're going to do this tour and we're each going to lose $500. If you know that going into it, and then that's what happens, then people can accept that, whereas you're like, well, I guess we'll see what happens. And, you go home, you're on tour for 7 weeks and you come home with, $600. And that's like, well, that's pretty grim. You know, and you just didn't know. You thought maybe it would be more, maybe whatever. So I think having a handle on that is a real key element to keeping a consistent lineup. Um, and I think also the other thing that I've learned, far too late, or far later than I should have, I guess. We always built our lineups in the early days based on who we were friends with and who
Right.
we thought had good taste in terms of like, oh, this guy wants to go the same direction we do musically. And it didn't really matter if, that person wasn't particularly good at their instrument or was really flaky or whatever. It's like, well, we like hanging out with him and he likes the same 5 records that we do. So therefore he's the guy. And really that's not the best way to kind of build your band. A band is a team like any organization,
Yeah.
and what you're looking for is people with every, you got to be able to play the fucking music. That's like the very baseline. But then beyond that, you want people with complementary skill sets. It's like, hey, this guy is a really good guitar player and he fucking designs websites. It's like, well, that's useful. Okay, cool.
Right.
Um, or depending on how young you are or whatever, it's like this guy can play drums and he's got a fucking big truck. It's like, okay, that's bringing something to the table, So you're looking for people that, get along fairly well, can play together and have complementary skill sets. Whereas, especially in the beginning with Cole and Ross and I, our skill sets were so similar that we just ended up stepping on each other's toes. It's like, hey, you're pretty good at drawing. Well, I'm pretty good at drawing. Well, Ross is also pretty good at drawing. Okay, cool. So now that means we have 3 people with really strong opinions about whatever it is we're going to draw. And then we're going to fucking nitpick each other, and because we all think that we should have been the one drawing it. Whereas this is, whereas if you had one guy that was good at drawing and then one guy that was, worked at a music store and could get gear for cheap, that's more valuable than 3 guys that all think this one little aspect is really important. So, it's chemistry, it's business sense, and it's just a sense of team building in general. That none of these are skill sets that have anything to do really with music as well. Like recognizing that has nothing to do with being a good guitar player or a good songwriter or good drummer or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That has to do with just understanding how organizations work and having, experienced, whether it's a workplace thing or a fucking drama club or a sports team or whatever. When you experience an organization that works and is effective together, you realize that you're tripping over yourself in your band because you don't have this kind of organizational strength, So that's kind of where one of the things that makes our lineup now really great is that everybody has complementary skill sets there's enough of a Venn diagram to where we can give each other meaningful input, but not step on each other's toes. That and the fact that we're not 21. Everybody trying to fucking, pull their dick out all the time and be like, no,
Right.
I got the biggest dick. No, I got the biggest dick.
Right. It's one of those things, and I guarantee in the comments of this video you see the same thing as well. When music becomes a business and whatever, and it's like, if it doesn't last. And it's hard to explain to people who don't spend a substantial amount of time playing in a band that the sooner you understand that it is kind of a business, the better off you're going to be, because you're dealing with multiple egos, multiple personalities, different sense of direction. And as soon as you can establish that, yeah, it is kind of a business and it does have to operate like one and everyone has to have their place, then the better off you're going to be and the better your chance of longevity. In my opinion, that it is a business. It is like you said, an organization. There's a structure to it that has to kind of be in place.
And I mean, I guess, it surprises me that people will still comment that now, because there is so much more transparency about the business side of it. and bands, literally will be like, yeah, we canceled this tour because fucking ticket sales were low or
Yeah.
whatever. Like they'll just give people the straight talk on the kind of realities of doing this. And I mean, my thing is that as long as the business is in service of the art, then that's fine, because we live the world we live in. I'm not here to say whether it's wrong or right or whatever. I mean, obviously I have my opinions on it, but that's a whole other can of worms. But the world we live in dictates that the way we value time is money. And if you sink tons and tons of time into something and you don't make any money from it, especially if it's a group project with multiple people involved, you're probably not going to be able to continue to put that time in it. And to me, it's like, yeah, I want to make as much fucking money as I possibly can playing music, because I don't want to go and, I used to fucking, I've worked in a million warehouses and fucking, done tech support and customer service and fucking worked in a factory. And like, I don't want to fucking do that. I want to play music. And, it's like, I don't want to pack, mail orders for our web store, but I would rather do that than go fucking make money for somebody else. And so ultimately, the business, as long as the business is in service of the art, and you're not sitting around going like, well, we've been doing market research, and what Exhumed fans really like is songs about chainsaws. So maybe we should do a song about a chainsaw.
Right.
I agree.
I agree with you. I do.
That will really resonate, but in this demographic and blah blah. It's like, as long as you're not creating like that, then I think it's it's just realism. And the other thing too is, I'm 50 years old. And yeah, when I was 17, I was like, I don't give a fuck if I make any money from this. And I want to get what I have to say out there. And at this point, we're about to release our 9th album, so I think it's out there. You know what I mean? It's like, I still feel like I have more to say or whatever, but I ultimately, that is not enough to sort of make me do this. I make music for myself that doesn't pay anything all the fucking time. I would love to make money off it, but I'm just saying, like, it's not like I don't do stuff purely artistically or whatever, but it's like, you got to be realistic. And I think that, because so much of the business side of being in a band has been pushed back onto the artist, at all levels, everybody's just more aware of it. And everybody that goes to a fucking show at a bar or a club or whatever, has some awareness that, like, yeah, if I fucking buy a record and a shirt, this will directly help these guys that I just enjoyed their show. It's not like, you're wandering around a fucking arena and you're like, oh, I'll have the cool, Metallica shirt. I'll just buy that because I want it. You're not like, boy, James Hetfield will really appreciate this $45 I spent on this t-shirt. That'll really help, help the boys get more gas for their fucking private jet. But people that go to underground shows are aware that, we're all living in this existence where we got to fucking make money to survive. And, part of supporting a band is, buying shit. And that doesn't mean it's the only way or it's the most important way, or that, if you're fucking broke this week and you go to a gig and you should feel guilty for not buying a shirt. No, absolutely not. But I'm just saying that, but that's part of the whole fucking thing. And I think that as fans, as a fan myself, I enjoy buying shit. Like, I like going to a gig and buying a fucking record.
Right.
Like, that's fun for me.
Right.
I'm an American. I like to fucking spend money like everybody else.
You got it.
Yeah.
So 2015, and I'm probably assuming it started a little bit sooner than that. Gruesome became. I ran across you guys very, very early and was, obviously a big Death fan, big Origins fan, big Roots fan. Coming up to this with Gruesome, was it the intentions of that initially as a project that you were working on, as a side project that became more than that, or was the intent there to be a full functioning machine?
I mean, I guess it depends who you talk to. In the original notion that when I met Gus, our drummer, what he and I said is that, we thought what Death to All was doing was really cool, but wouldn't it be great to see another incarnation of that project where you have, Terry Butler and Rick Ross and Chris Ryford and James Murphy and so on and so forth getting involved and focusing on the early stuff, because I felt like, there was this whole, I don't hijacking sounds more negative than I mean it, but it was like the whole legacy of death was dominated by this talk about, oh, it's so progressive and, open all these musical doors and Chuck's a genius, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, that's all great. But, like really, Scream Bloody Gore and especially Leprosy are kind of the records that established the whole commercial viability of, what had been a tape trading scene up until then. And while they're certainly not the first death metal albums, just in case you want to get in that stupid fucking debate, they're not. But they were the first to really break through. And you buy them in a fucking mall. And they came out after Rain and Blood, which kind of woke people up to like that there's something heavier than Metallica out there.
Right.
Again, people shopping at the mall. So anyway, I thought that doing a DTA with focus on the old stuff would be really cool. And that was more what I was interested in as a fan. And then I just made the offhand comment that, if they can't get that going, then I just write my own death songs and that would be funny. And then I did. And Gus, for whatever reason, I just, I sent him some really crude like MIDI demos. And he was like, can you record this with a real guitar? Because I think there might be something here. And I was like, okay. And he saw the potential much more than I did. I thought that it was like just a pure like novelty thing. But his day job is he's a cover guy. Like he plays, covers gigs. Yep. So I think he has a better instinct for the appetite people have for that kind of stuff. Whereas I had no clue.
Right. And it definitely was, I mean, he saw something because it hit it right at the cusp of the explosion, of people reaching back and trying to connect with what death was.
Yeah.
And I think, the two parts of it that were super awesome is it felt like kind of new old stock death material. And I know that was the premise to do so, but it felt refreshing at the same time as being 1992, so it was great in that regard, and obviously opened up kind of a big chasm for what you've been doing over the last handful of years as well.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing that my instinct on the project was wrong in many ways, but one way I think it was 100% right is I was like, if we're going to do this, we have to lean into the fact that we are a tribute band and we have to make it so fucking obvious and so overstated that, it will go from being a liability. Being unoriginal will go from being a bug to a feature.
Yeah.
And there's a certain segment of the audience for that band that I think, maybe doesn't even really love the band or whatever, but they're just curious to see if we can pull it off, and I like that. To me, I find that challenging, especially on the last record we did, which is a little bit more outside of my kind of comfort zone, the just being like, okay, well, sure, maybe people aren't surprised that the guy from Exhumed can do Scream Bloody Gore stuff, but it's like, yeah, I can do this too. So I love that aspect of it, beyond obviously a reverence for the source material and the romance of Chuck being gone far too young and those sort of what if and, all that kind of stuff. I'm on board for all of it, but I also, as a shithead, I also relish the idea that like, well, we might be setting ourselves up for fucking failure. Let's see what happens. I think I find that invigorating. It's like, it's like playing sports or whatever. It's like, okay, I think we got a good team and we really gone through our plays, but you're going to get out on the court or on the field and whatever's going to happen is going to happen, So I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you are right. I think there's, even from an outsider's perspective, when the next album's coming and what the next chain of, in the nod come in what's coming and how are you going to pull it off and how is it going to progress in the way death progressed, and what's your interpretation of it, and are you able to do that? And yeah, I think, when I talked to Gus about this, and I said the same thing. Like, I don't hear negativity, but I'm not in the band either, and I think when you're in the band, you kind of microscope all the negative stuff a little bit too much from time to time. If you're anything like me, he's like, he said what? But from an outsider's perspective, I think people are constantly impressed. And I think the grip of scrutiny is probably loosened quite a bit, as far as, knowing, okay, yeah, it is a tribute, but at the same time, it's your perception of what would be that step. So it gives you a little bit more liberty, I think, as you've grown as an outsider's perspective, to kind of have your interpretation of it, which I think you guys have done a tremendous job.
Well, thanks. Yeah. I mean, I honestly, like, the first record was a real hurdle to clear, because my thing was like, when I thought it was just going to be a project and maybe we might play like a Maryland Death Fest or whatever, I was like, there's going to be like a small group of people that love it, and then a smaller group of people that probably fucking hate it and are really mad about it, and then a larger group of people that'll be like, why would you do this? And I'll be like, and I will think all three of those groups have a point. My thing is, I always just I strive really hard just in life, to be as objective as possible. And it's a great thing to strive for, because you can never be 100% objective.
Right.
So I kind of like, I want to, take the piss out of it. In my mind, I'm like, well, why would I think this sucks? And I'm not a person that goes around, being negative and hating on things. That doesn't bring me any joy whatsoever. But I try to consider what people's perspectives might be, and whether or not they're justified. And I'm all for legitimate criticism of, especially of myself, because, I'm a fucking lead singer. Of course if you got something to talk, if you want to talk to me about me, like, sure. As long as it's actual criticism, not just, you suck.
Right.
Hey, I think this is dumb, and here's why. It's like, if it's something I can engage with, I'm very open to learning from it. And chances are I probably already thought about it, because,
going from the gruesome and the death connection, doing the living monstrosity and left to die stuff, pretty epic position to be in. I mean, working with some great people who helped build the scene that we all function in today. A lot of talent in that band, a lot of great icons in that band. What is it like doing and working with these guys, and what's the mental difference between those two projects for you?
I mean, I guess it's one of those things where I think about it, and I refer back to sort of my teenage self quite often. I'm like, oh, would he think this album is wimpy or whatever? Because I still want to scratch that same itch. But I think to myself, like, oh, if I would have known when I was 14 that I would be doing this, I would blow my fucking mind. But at the same time, at the end of the day, like, if you start thinking about all that while you're doing it, you're going to get in your head, or at least I would get in my head,
Right.
Then thinking about like, oh, Chuck is dead, and he did all this, and it means this and that to these people and all this stuff. And it's like, you kind of have to just put it to the side. And it's like another sports analogy. It's like, you're going to go out there and, fucking get on the court against Larry Bird. You can't be sitting around thinking about how great Larry Bird is. You just got to be out there. You got to think about what you're doing, So on one hand, I have infinite respect for these guys, but on the other hand, it's like, well, you can't give these guys too much respect if you're going to be their fucking peer. If you're going to go out there and do the gig with them, then, we all got to be on the same level.
Right.
And I mean, I guess it would either be like, the alternative would be, there's two ways you can go. One is these guys are just dudes playing instruments, and I'm just a dude that plays instruments, so let's just do it together and
Hmm.
play these songs I like. Or the other one would be these guys are gods and I'm up here with them, so therefore I must be a god, which I find to be, too egotistical even for me. So, to me, it's just like, hey, these are just dudes, fucking playing riffs, man. And I'm just a dude that loves playing riffs. And, you got to go out there and do the thing. And nobody, especially like doing Left to Die, nobody wants, you know, to watch a show where I'm like going on about on and on and on about Chuck and death and this and that. It's like, Jesus Christ, dude, they fucking know that's why they're in the building.
Hmm.
Certainly, we acknowledge it every night, and we give Chuck a big shout out every night. But at the end of the day, it's like we're here to play the fucking songs. You can read a book about Chuck. You can talk on the internet about Chuck. You can talk to us after the show about Chuck or before the show. But like at the end of the day, the music is sort of what you put in the forefront, and you just try to execute the songs, the best you can. And I love the songs, so I get a lot of enjoyment out of it, And I think that it works better if I just, for me, in terms of staying out of my own head about it, just if I just enjoy the fucking songs, And if
Hmm.
I sit around being like, oh well, these are big shoes to fill and this and that, it's like, I can't think like that. I have to think like, well, if these guys, if Terry and Rick and James, if they want me here doing it, then that's, who would know better than them. So if they're happy with it, then I guess it's good. And, then I think, well, if it wasn't me, I would be like watching somebody else being like, I could do that. It's like, so, if not me, then who? So why,
Right.
why not me? And it's like, when opportunity, knocks or whatever, you got to fucking get a roll with it. And I've been very fortunate, and I know I put in a lot of work and I don't feel like anything's been handed to me, but at the same time, a lot of people put in more work and haven't gotten the same opportunities that I have. So, I feel like it's, you just got to kind of play the cards you're dealt and do the best you can. And I love playing the songs, and, playing with those guys is a privilege, but it's also just fun playing songs with dudes you like hanging out with.
Right, right. I do like your analogy on that. Why not me? I mean, you have done your time and you've paid your dues, and but even from a younger person's perspective, the same principle. Why not you? And if you don't have that attitude, then how far are you actually going to carry your stuff? So, I mean, it's a great way to put that, and a great way to think about it. As far as like diving, as this is going to be more of a question that I think people would want to hear an answer to, as opposed to something I would want to dive into on it. But as far as like, I know some things, if I don't ask, then people will be like, why didn't you ask that question? So anyways,
Let's make people happy. That's what we're here
yeah. So playing Chuck's material, is there certain riffs that you really connect with, certain portions of songs, or even some riffs that you're like, lyrically, a lot of people don't think about is when you're playing a riff, lyrical patterns have a ton to do with the complexity of being able to deliver. If the vocal patterns don't match the riff, and it's,
Right.
there's certain things that he did where you're like, how the fuck, you know?
Well, I mean, thankfully, especially the early stuff that we do with Left to Die, Chuck is in a way what Sean and Paul from Cynic referred to as his nursery rhyme phase.
Right, right.
People come to pay respect, taking pictures of the dead. This is what life comes to be. Once they live, now they're deceased. So it's not too challenging. It's not really until Human when the vocal lines start to kind of disengage from the guitar lines
Hmm.
significantly. Um, and when I was a kid, like most metal guitar players, especially in the late '80s, you started being like, wow, if I could play Seek and Destroy, that'd be so cool. So I started with Metallica, and then Celtic Frost was the next big one for me. And the great thing about Celtic Frost was that what I was playing sounded pretty fucking close to the record, which was not always the case when I was trying to play, Blackened or whatever. And then it was Scream Bloody Gore. I spent so much time with that record, and then Leprosy and Spiritual Healing. And it was really cool because as I was getting better as a guitar player, Chuck was always like a couple steps ahead of me. Like, as I turned the corner, I would see his taillights disappearing around the next. I gotta catch up. And so it was really a great way to learn, learning those records and learning those records in succession. And obviously, I was 14 at the time, so it wasn't like everything I figured out was 100% accurate. But most of it was pretty fucking close. Fortunately, I've always had an okay ear, and I've tried to keep developing it. So playing that material, I feel uniquely advantaged, getting to do that for money because I spent hours and hours and hours and hours in my bedroom, and obviously this is before YouTube and, there was no fucking Guitar Pro. Like you couldn't get transcriptions of this
Right.
stuff.
Right.
Even if you took guitar lessons, your teacher may or may not figure this stuff out for you. Who knows? But I didn't take lessons because I thought, the guys who were teaching guitar lessons were posters. They didn't know about like heavy music.
Right.
Anyway, so I spent so much time with those first three records that I feel as comfortable with that material, honestly, as I do with Exhumed stuff, and probably more comfortable than some Exhumed stuff because the early shit with Exhumed, we practiced 2 or 3 for 4 days a week, and then we recorded it all, and then we played, most of the songs for the first 3 albums got played live, some of them a lot. As time has gone on, we rehearse less and less, and there's more and more material that only gets played live maybe once or maybe never. So, but the songs I learned when I was 14 are always, right at the edge of my fingertips. I can recall them pretty quickly. So they feel extremely natural, and even some of the stuff like on was Alternate Future, where the vocals do kind of disengage from the guitar lines a little bit. When the guitar line is so ingrained in your fucking memory, you're able to concentrate more on doing the vocal well. So I came into those gigs with a big advantage, and I think that because I know, and that's also why I think writing the Gruesome stuff, especially early on, was, it wasn't challenging or that I didn't have to work hard at it, but it also felt really natural.
Sure.
Because understanding the difference between what is thrash and what is death metal, like learning those songs and picking up on, Chuck's patterns and the kind of tonality that he uses, was just instrumental into my understanding, like, what is death metal? Why is it not thrash, but it's death metal? And it's like, because of these kinds of note choices and these kinds of patterns that he uses and these type of like this kind of melodic sensibility that thrash generally did not have. So yeah, I mean, it's playing that stuff is, it feels like playing my own stuff.
Sure. And you did mention this earlier. Welcome to the 50 Club. You made it. Thinking back, because again, you and I are virtually the same age. When we started doing this as 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, the last thing in the world you ever thought you'd be doing when you're 50 is playing in a death metal band.
Right.
So
but yet I didn't make any other kind of alternate plans.
But so you've got the 35 plus whatever years going. And I feel like personally, from my aspect, I'm doing more now than I ever have. And I would say that's probably fair to say for you, that you're
sure
involved in a hell of a lot more. You're accomplishing a lot more. So you're kind of on your game, right? And
hopefully
there's a lot of OG 50-year-olds out there that are still dominating the scene, which I don't think any of us really kind of could see that being the case. Where does the next 20 years take you? I mean, obviously it's hard to look down the road and say, oh, I'm going to be doing this for X amount of years, but physically you feel good, mentally you're locked in.
I mean, I guess, we're Exhumed is always, 7 or 8 years behind, the Cannibal Corpses and obituaries of the world, because really our career was starting, right at the turn of the century. And then, those guys were kind of at like the 10-year mark by then, so we're kind of watching with some interest, kind of what their career trajectory ends up being here as the end, you know, comes into sight. My main thing is that, you know, physically, I want us to be playing the songs well, because I think we've all seen legacy bands where you go to see them live and you just like, you can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you physically can't, you just can't do it. And it's not like you suck. It's like, dude, you're 70 or whatever. And I want to be as objective as possible to recognize when that is becoming unmanageable. And, that's number one. And then number two really is just the physicality of touring, Exhumed is a fucking DIY band. Like, we have a front of house guy, but I mean, like, we're the people loading the fucking cabinets on stage. We're the people loading the trailer at the end of the show. That's us.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, we tour in a fucking van. Yeah, we stay in a hotel almost every night, but still, not every night, because sometimes you got to drive 9 hours to the next gig.
Yep.
We try to keep it to like once or twice a tour at this point, and we also generally take 1 day off a week, which was not the case before. But physically, there's going to come a time when that is not going to be possible, or it's going to be the trade-off will no longer make sense. It'll be like, I don't want to fucking get a hernia, just to like do a U.S. tour and play in front of 150 to 250 people a night.
Right.
That's just silly. So, we're not. I don't think we're quite at the point where we should start kind of planning an exit strategy, but we're also not super far away from that point.
Mm-hmm.
It's just. With this band, I guess I've always felt like a late bloomer. We did our first record in '98 when the scene had largely moved on from grindcore and death metal. I knew that most of my heroes were like 17 putting out their first record, and I was like 24. And I don't think we really dialed in what it was we were doing in terms of making the band work, on a business level and everything else. We didn't figure that out really until I was, 40.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, it's like, I feel like, fuck, we're on a good run. Like, we're finally going the way that, you'd always want it to be, but, nothing lasts forever. And also, I'm very aware that things can change instantly, I mean, like,
right.
Who knows? Right now I feel good. I go to the fucking gym, 5 days a week, and I can run 4 miles in 45 minutes if I need to. However, there could be one van accident, it could be one fucking twisted, ankle or whatever. I mean, I've been hit by a car on my bike before. Thankfully it was no big deal, but it could have been. So it's like, shit just happens. So you just don't know.
Right. We don't get up as quickly when we fall down. That's
right?
that's the thing. I've had 2 back surgeries in the last handful of years, and it's, shit you can't predict. Like, I can't control it. It wasn't like, I fell off my BMX bike and I got to have a back surgery. It's like, I'm just fucking getting old, and my discs are compressing, and it's things you can't foresee. Right now, I feel great right now. I don't do live circuits like you do and whatever, but I feel like, even creatively right now, I feel sharper than I ever have. And, and maybe that's the transition that a lot of the aging musicians go down, is it's select dates, it's fly-in dates, it's, doing things that count and things that matter, but not putting the fire out. It's, taking and walking away from something that, I've heard the new album, and in my opinion, it's some of the better shit you guys have ever done. And it's very impressive, and it's hard to sit and listen to that and then at the same time be talking like, well, we're, but it's the reality of it. I mean, it really is.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. I mean, in terms of, you know, creativity or I mean, I almost think of it as like power, right? Like, what is power? Power is the ability to take a thought and then manifest that as a thing, right? That's power. And because of, the skill set that I and everyone in the band have acquired, and because of the changes in technology that have made recording and production and everything so much more accessible, because of those two things, at this point it's easier, you know than any time in history to be like, hey, I have these ideas, I want to just fucking get them out and turn them into a thing. And that's what we've chosen to invest our money in. Sitting here in our recording studio where we fucking record all our own albums and everything.
Right.
So to me, I feel like this is an amount of power I couldn't have imagined when I started wanting to do this. The ability to just be like, yeah, I can just go in and record my own fucking rhythm guitars, take as long as I need to, and whatever, make changes on the fly and blah 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 blah. Like, holy shit! And I guess I feel my thing is like, I have these opportunities and I have the ability to pursue them, and so why would I not?
Right.
And maybe people don't need another 50-year-old straight white male's perspective on anything or whatever, but that's all I got. So I'm out here like a dog pissing on a fucking wall, like, hey, I'm here, this is
Yeah.
just so you know. And we're having a good time doing it, and I think and I do think what we're doing is objectively good and worthwhile, and obviously I'm deeply biased, but I mean, I think that if if we're losing a plot, hopefully we know people that would tell us, so that we could either be like, oh, okay, let's just stop or reevaluate or whatever.
Right.
I don't want to be embarrassing myself or embarrassing people that like the band.
Well, I would say, like I said, I've heard the new record, and I sat and listened to everything again here today as I was
Cool.
doing stuff around for work. And I'm impressed. I'm really impressed.
Cool.
And it's, it's one of those things where as an aging musician, I think the same thing, like in my head, everything sounds fine, but what does it? I mean, how far disconnected am I getting
Right.
within myself and whatever? But I think it's, you're on the right track, man. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You're still cranking out likely just better and better stuff. So it's you're
Thanks.
it's, and I'm not just saying that because I'm one of those people too, where if like I don't like something, I just won't tell you. You know what I mean? I'm not going to tell you,
can
hey,
just be like, hey, I prefer this other thing that you did because
yeah,
of this.
but
like,
it's good, man. I'm really impressed. So I think people are really going to dig it, and I think people are going to be surprised. It's good. The production is fucking stomping. So it's great.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we found a balance between clear and powerful, but not tidy or loud.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing to find, like when you get that before you're getting, especially in that kind of music, to not be too refined in sound. Like you got to have that natural raw energy, because I think that's what makes that music. So it's good. One thing I did want to ask you, obviously music is pretty encompassing for you. What do you do outside of music? You got to have something as an escape from music. What do you enjoy?
Well, I think my biggest sort of hobby is, I'm a big comic book guy, and thankfully Ross, our bass player, he's a big toy and comic guy as well. So when Exhumed is on tour here in the States, and if we arrive, we're like, oh, we're going to get in town 2 hours before loaded. And Ross is like, okay, well, here's a comic store over here, and there's a toy store over there. And then we'll hit the grocery store and make sure that we have, the right food and stuff for later. So that's really fun. I love just going into a fucking store that smells like old newsprint and thumbing through piles of shit and finding, those missing issues or whatever.
Sure.
So I get a lot of enjoyment out of, reading comics and reading comic book history stuff. It's something that I've really, really gotten into in the last few years. So that's really fun. Creatively, I dabble a little bit in writing. I had a a short story published a few years back, and I always think that I should get back to writing more. But then I got into like orchestral and like cinematic composition 5 years ago, so that's sort of taken over the time that I used to spend writing prose.
Is that more like what you're kind of basing on your solo stuff?
Yeah, yeah, it's more more. It's it's music that is narrative, and I guess the stuff that interests me more is stuff that's more like done with a traditional orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like it's more compositionally focused than production focused. Where like if you listen to like the soundtrack for Dune or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds amazing and it works great in the film, but it's more production than it is composition.
Sure.
Um, so it doesn't interest me as much as a composer or as a listener. I'm more into hearing, oh, like we can do that with the flutes. That's neat.
Right.
So I write a lot of music like that, and I actually I started a podcast called My Favorite Nightmare. That is like there's a company that did horror comics in the 1970s. The company's called Skywald, and everything that they published is in the public domain. Nothing was copyrighted.
Oh,
So I started doing adaptations of some of the stories. It's like old time radio dramas and doing voices and writing little themes and stuff for each story. And that's kind of like my purely for fun. Like how many dorky, unmarketable habit or interests can I cram into one thing? It's like obscure 70s horror comics, check. Film music, check. Old time radio, check.
so you're kind of a nerd. That's awesome. I mean, I think
Yeah,
it's there's more people involved in things like that than I think we realize. I think a lot of that stuff, especially as you get older and you end up reflecting a little bit more on your childhood and what kind of formulated you and developed you. Those interests kind of recycle back,
sure.
and like you said, doing a little bit more history research on those type of things and whatever. So
And you also, you're assuming that you're a functional adult mostly, like you have the kind of disposable income to like treat your inner child to
yeah.
all those things that your parents are like, I don't know, do we really want to get him another X-wing fighter? Like you already got one. I'm like, yeah, but mom, uh, you know. Now it's like I don't have any fucking kids. It's like whatever. If I want to buy some stupid shit, if I'm going to buy the fucking Doctor Doom Tower of Doom from Secret Wars for $120, I'm going to buy it.
Right.
You know, I know if I can afford it or not. So you kind of get to treat yourself, give yourself the love that you wanted but never got.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
your parents are like, maybe I should like nurture his interests and but also kind of be tough on him so that he grows. And you're like, but I just want somebody to buy me action figures. And you're like, all right, well now I can be that. I can spoil myself like that.
Right.
But I think, and the other thing, and this might sound horrifically cocky, you know, but it's like it's not hard for me to write a death metal album. It's not that it doesn't take any work or that I don't work at it, but I know I can do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a struggle to understand it or the mechanics of it or what my style is and what I think works and what appeals to me and what doesn't. Like, I got it. So it is a challenge, to figure out how an orchestra works and how,
Right.
what Jerry Goldsmith is doing in the Logan's Run soundtrack or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That is challenging. Like, I can hear a riff and then fucking figure out how to play it, but I can't hear, an orchestral passage and just be like, oh yeah, it's this. And then the bassoon is doing blah, 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 or whatever. That is a challenge to me. So that's kind of what keeps me stimulated. I like to feel like like I'm learning something new or I'm deepening my knowledge or broadening something, just because that's stimulating to me. And it's not that writing death metal isn't stimulating. It's just like, I know I can do this.
Mm-hmm. Just some new challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep your brain firing, and I feel you. I mean, I do it a lot outside of music for myself too, and just taking on new challenges. And for the same reason is like I'm a firm believer just watching my my parents, the way they went in aging, and my in-laws watching them age, is there's not enough challenge going on in their life, and the results of that is catastrophic. I think keeping your brain under stress keeps you firing, to a certain degree, and keeping
And
your,
under
challenged.
positive stress,
Yeah,
you
challenged,
know.
I say, would be a better word.
Yeah, and because you got to give yourself some kind of opportunity for growth, and you got to stay engaged with stuff
Hmm.
because otherwise you're going to just end up you're going to end up obese, sitting in front of the TV, and thinking that
Veg. Yeah.
undocumented millions of undocumented immigrants are voting illegally to unseat your local assemblyman or whatever, and
Yeah.
that's no way to live.
Yep. No, I agree. I think it's keeping your brain, positively engaged, and it's funny now sitting here thinking about, go, once you hit this midlife thing, you start thinking of, the end is in sight at least, and knowing like, what do I got to do to just be as functional as possible and keep,
Right.
the brain firing and stuff. So, one other thing I wanted to kind of touch on is, I know, a lot of people are going to be curious, is gear.
Okay.
What do obviously we all have our evolution through gear. What do you currently, start as you go through your chain? What are you using for guitars? What are you using for your any pedals, anything of the sort, your rack, whatever, through your chain?
It's funny, like growing up and getting into this kind of music, I always had a real suspicion of people that were super into gear. And like there's a certain kind of personality trait that is like really into like gizmos. Like my
Uh-huh.
fucking wife, she's like, I want to make this dish because it's an excuse to buy this weird thing that chops food in a certain way. Because she's just like, oh, look at this thing, and you can do this and then like whatever. Whereas I am not that way in general, and not with music gear at all. I kind of figure, I'm like, if you can't, take a normal guitar and a normal set of strings and a normal amp and a normal pedal and get something good out of it, like then you
It's
probably
probably the player.
right. It's probably you. So live, I usually just use a PV6505 plus. Um, you know, Obviously the 5150 is better, but the 6505 plus is much more affordable, and it's also the kind of thing where if you're on tour and it falls down a stairway and explodes, you're not
You
going
can
to
replace it.
right. You're not going to be heartbroken. You're going to be pissed, but it's not going to be like, oh my god, because I had this 5150 from the early '90s that I used to tour with, and I thought to myself, I'm like, why am I touring with a 20-year-old amp? Like, why?
Hmm.
Why am I doing this to myself? My main amp in the studio is an Angle Powerball, um, which I kind of struggled with at first because it has so much gain, like so much gain. Um, and also as a guitar player, like the better I feel like I'm playing, I'll kind of keep backing off the pre-gain on the amp.
Hmm.
To where by the end of a tour, usually it sounds closer to like a JSAM 800 or something like that, just in terms of like amp saturation.
Yeah.
Um, I just playing like really fast, lower tune music. I think clarity is of primary importance.
Hmm.
Assuming that I can play the fucking songs. um,
But
and I
by the end,
use
by the end of tour, you should be dialed in.
right exactly week one. Who knows? But I use there's a guy named Michael Klein who is a fucking genius, and he builds all our pedals and stuff.
Hmm.
He's in Kansas City, Missouri, and he's a lovely, lovely person and just a fucking genius. Um, and so I have a overdrive pedal that my buddy Matt Slime drew the cover for. It's like Slimer from Ghostbusters with a million hot dogs. So it's called a Slimer pedal. It basically serves the same function as the Tube Screamer. I think that the EQ is a lot more pleasant than the Tube Screamer, which is real specific and can be a little nasally. I like it, but I can see why people are like, oh, there's that Tube Screamer sound.
Right.
Um, and again, I try to sort of use as little gain as I can get away with, depending on how I'm playing that day. Beyond that, I just have another thing that Michael built called the Lonely Ghost. which is a delay reverb boost pedal, and that's going into the effects loop. So when it's time to solo, you just hit one button. Either, with the 6505, it has this really robust foot controller.
Mm-hmm.
It only has, I think, clean, crunch, or whatever, and effects. So there's only 3 buttons on it. Because when I'm playing live and I'm singing and I'm sweating, my hair's in my face, I'm like, I can't look at a whole pedal board and figure out what to hit. I just want to hit one button ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my wireless is a Shure. I forget, I don't know if it's the newest one, but it's pretty new. I got it, I think, early last year or whatever. And it has a tuner, so I took my tuner off my pedal board. So my pedal board is just a noise suppressor, just the NS2. I don't know. Someone's like, you got to try the Decimator. It's way better. And I put it on there. I was like, I can't tell the difference.
Yeah. I think it's just, I don't know. I have both. And Decimator to me just is like, it still doesn't compare to the original NS2. Like that's just I think it just does what it's supposed to do.
Right. I mean, I'm just like, I just don't really know what other feature to add. It's just like, it just makes it quiet when it's supposed to be quiet.
Yeah.
That's it. So whatever. And, I'm sure the Decimator is great and people love it. That's cool. But this is cheaper and I've had it forever.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just my wireless, overdrive, and the noise suppressor, and that's it. In Gruesome, I have a Maxon flanger. Before I started working with Michael a lot on my pedals, I had a Maxon endorsement and they make great pedals as well. I still have a bunch, like I have the Super Distortion and the OD808, which are both great. But for Gruesome, I put the flanger on there for the beginning of Frailty, and then there's a section in Inhumane that has a flanger phaser kind of thing going, and that's about it. I have a bunch of pedals, here in the studio. I've got a couple different choruses and a bunch of different distortions and stuff. And recording is a little bit different because you're going to take time to dial in different tones.
Yeah, way different. Yeah.
But even then, we've been, in the spirit of reduction on this new album. Instead of doing 4 tracks of rhythm guitars, we ended up doing 3. We were only going to do 2, but we got this tone that we really liked, and we just didn't want to get rid of it. So we just put a quiet voice in the middle that just has a little bit different texture. And that's with another pedal that Michael Klein designed called a Painkiller. It's similar to a Rat. Again, it's a little bit more versatile than a Rat, but it has that kind of sound.
Sure.
And I just wasn't getting it from the Slimer or from the Super Distortion that I had on either side. And it was a nice kind of texture. But yeah, I mean, I just try to keep it really simple, durable. And the other thing is, I also want to be able to go to a music store in some podunk town and be like, fuck, this broke. I need a thing.
Right.
Like they're going to have Super Slinkies and NS2s and, you know what I mean? Like they're going to have the basics. So I want to make sure that I'm working with something that's, pretty basic. Right. Obviously I don't use 9s to tune to B. I have the, whatever it is, the not even Slinkies or whatever for that. But I just try to keep everything minimal and something that I can replace easily because shit's gonna break.
Sure. So if you're grabbing a guitar right now and that's your go-to, you get one choice. What are you picking out of your stock?
Well, I mean, it's a little tough because I guess I have guitars in B and D and E, but my 2 favorites in B, I have an LTD Deluxe Eclipse. With a trem bar, with a Floyd, and it's
EMGs.
Got
or what do you got? EMGs or what do you got?
Seymour Duncan Blackouts.
Are you a passive? Oh, you're actives.
Yeah, I have been thinking about going to passive, but all my guitars are wired for active, and I just don't want to go through the hassle of.
It's tough, man. When you're so used to running. That's me too. Now I'm just like, ugh. I'm sticking. I've been running 81s for 35 years, man.
So and I do still like the EMGs, but I think the Blackouts they're lower noise.
Yeah, they're a little more refined.
I think the EQ is not as constrictive as it is on the EMGs. And then, but I have in my guitar tuned to D that I use all the time, which is my black E2 Arrow. Um, I have the well, they're not the Mick Thompson set anymore. They're the alt metal or whatever the fuck it is, which are a little bit more like between a blackout and the 8185 set. Like they're slightly scoopy. But my philosophy is always the lower you tune, the more mids you need. So to me, D doesn't even really sound like down tuning. It just sounds like a guitar in standard, really. So I'm more comfortable with a little bit more scooping.
Sure. So your East. So your 1000. What else? What's your other one that you were going to grab?
Like I said, my black E2.
Your E2. Yeah.
That one. It's funny because I have a white one and it's technically the same guitar, but the black one is just, I don't know. That guitar it came out of the fucking box. Same thing with the Eclipse.
Yeah.
Like, it just came out of the box. I put a new set of strings on it, whatever, changed the tuning, and I've never touched them.
It's weird. It's weird, man. When you go down weird roads with guitars like that, there's just something. It's just magic between maybe it's that wood or something specific. It just feels right when you grab it. And I've got one guitar that I swear to God, I haven't had to touch that fucking thing in 6 years. Like I'll throw new strings on it and the neck is just right. And it's just, and then I've got two guitars just like it. And I'm constantly something's fucking wrong.
They're great guitars. They're just not perfect guitars.
Yeah.
I have a couple. I have an Eclipse and I forget what model it is, but it's like a super strat type. I have those two in E for work here in the studio, doing other things. But yeah, usually it's just the Eclipse or an Arrow. They're comfortable. They look cool. I'd switch to the Eclipse when Exhumed went to South America because you're flying almost every day.
Smaller,
fucking gigantic, thing. So I was like, oh, I'll get used to the smaller guitar. And at first I was like, I don't know if I like it. And then I was like, oh no, I don't like it. I fucking love it.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
It's really fun to play. And, again, my thing is also just like the less I have to think about, I have tons of friends and I'm so glad I do because when I have questions or need help there, I can call them. I have tons of friends who are like, yeah, when I get a guitar, I'd love to like take it apart and do all this shit. I'm like, oh God, that sounds like a horrible nightmare. I just want to fucking tune it to the tuning it's going to be in and then never, ever think about it again. That's my goal because I don't really love gear. I have no excitement about it. I mean, I'm always excited to get a new guitar. Like I'm not dead inside, but it's not like, oh boy, that's new guitar day. It's like,
yeah, I'm with you, man. I am with you. It's especially like it comes to like anything in my amp or anything like that. I still run a block 5150 that I've had for decades.
One of the greatest.
And I don't want to touch it. I don't want to replace it. I don't want anything. I'm not even going to try new shit. I just don't care. It's what I want.
The funny thing to me, especially with the way equipment's going now, is people are always like, oh, if you get this thing, it does the same thing as this other thing. I'm like, well, I already have the other thing.
Yeah. I'm good.
Like, but when that dies, you're not going to be able to find parts for it. And you're going to turn around and you're not going to know anything and you're going to be fucked. And I'm like, I'm not going to be fucked. I'll call you. Like Dan from Gruesome, he loves gizmos, dude. He's like just a gizmo guy. Or Leon, from Impaled, and he's been in and out of Exhumed a million times. They fucking love gizmos, and I'm the ideal friend for them to have because I'm just smart enough to get it and be able to understand what they're saying. But I'm just dumb enough to need them to explain it.
Which I love to do.
I'm impressed by their explanations, so it works out good for everybody. I get what I need. They get a little validation. They get to feel smarter than me, which they are. So it's a win-win. But yeah, I just want, I just want to feel. I just want to move some air, and I want it to sound good out of the box, and I want it to be simple enough to where I can either repair, replace, or I know somebody that can, on like 0 days notice, because on tour you can't be like, well, we can't play the show because I guess my amp broke. You know what I mean? Right. It's like you got to figure out a way to do the show. Right.
So the inevitable here that we're going to kind of bookend here with is the new Exhumed album. we're creeping up on a date, aren't we? What's
February
the
20th is the release date. Yes.
Okay, so we're creeping up on it, and I've already mentioned several times that I'm digging it. I am really digging it. Let's
Awesome.
get your opinion. If you got to sum this thing up in a paragraph or two, what's it mean to you? What's it feel like to you? You know, give me a little bit of your insight on what it is.
I mean, you know, from the beginning of wanting to do a band, I wanted to be in a band that had a consistent style and stayed true to it. Um, and I don't know that as a teenager I thought through about how potentially limiting that could be. But I remember being very upset by, not just like Cold Lake and
Yeah,
records like that, but even records like Human and Necroticism.
Cold Lake did make me very angry when it came out.
Yeah, those ones really bummed me out. So, I wanted to be in a band that was consistent. So I do
Mhm.
think that if you know what Exhumed sounds like, this also sounds like Exhumed. It's not going to be a shock stylistically, but I do feel that each record we do tries to find its own stylistic area of focus that gives it its own personality and gives it, something that makes it distinct from other records. And I think this one feels, it's got a little bit more of like a sleazier, looser kind of groove throughout a lot of the record. Um, whereas I think when we just, did a slower record last was like Necrocracy, and that's still very, thrash death tight groove kind of thing. Whereas these grooves I feel like are considerably looser. I mean, the second single we did, Shovelhead, I'm like, well, this is the first Exhumed song I think somebody might be able to strip to. Uh, so I think that there's a kind of loose swagger in some of the groove sections, and the whole record is themed around the American highway, and the myriad possibilities for death, dismemberment, and destruction contained therein. So that was a lot of fun exploring that, and it kind of fits in. I've been on a big kind of just a '70s overall like film, TV, comics, music kick. So I think that it fits in with that sort of like road trip biker romance thing, but
Sure.
also sleaze exploitation kind of vibe. Um, and I think there's a big sort of highway obsession running throughout the decade. From Easy Rider to like Cannonball Run even or whatever.
Hmm.
So I think that that's kind of what the album is infused with, but it's still Exhumed. And if you hated all our other records, you'll probably hate this one. And if you liked some of our records, you probably will like this one, maybe better than some other ones. And who knows.
Awesome. Well, uh, I gotta commend you again for being such a heavy hitter at this age. It's inspiring, and I commend you for that. And I do recommend people dig into you a bit and explore your catalog because it's pretty vast and it's admirable. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the future brings for you because, like I said, I think there's no doubt that you're firing on all cylinders and it's inspiring. I mean,
Yeah.
as other counterparts in the industry, when people say, oh, well, I was going to slow down, but then I seen Matt was doing this, it's like, okay, so it's keeping each other chugging forward and stuff. So it's the name does get pressed around and it's good to see, so looking forward to seeing what you got cooking in the next few years and all that, and really looking forward to seeing what people think of the new album because like I said, I'm digging it. So it's
Cool.
um, I want to thank you for spending so much time here with me today and
My
kind
pleasure.
of sharing some history on you and some personal information. It's great to hear. So anything else you got upcoming that you want to throw out there?
Um, well, the only other two things that are in the bag right now have not been announced, so I shouldn't say anything about them. But yeah, Exhumed's record comes out February 20th. We're doing a U.S. tour from February 19th through like March 21st or something, and then we go to Europe through April, and then we go to Australia and New Zealand. So when you're doing an album about the road, you got to hit the road to support
Yeah,
it.
there you go.
And I'm very excited to get back out. We only played 2 shows last year, so we're itchy, man. We're ready to fucking get back out there.
Awesome. Well, I highly recommend people check it out. And again, buddy, thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and um, look forward to seeing what you got rock and rolling here in the future too. So, thanks for the
Lucky
time. Thanks for the time, and you're always welcome back anytime you got stuff you want to share.
Cool. Let's do it. All right. Thanks, bud.
All right, take care, man.
All right. See ya.